Egypt recorded everything. And I mean everything. The flooding schedules of the Nile, the weight of grain delivered to royal storehouses, the names of foreign prisoners captured in border skirmishes nobody remembers. They carved tax receipts into stone. They painted building logs onto tomb walls. They counted the bricks laid per week by workers on construction sites that no longer exist. The ancient Egyptians were arguably the most obsessive record keepers the world has ever produced, and their records survived. Papyrus, hieroglyphs, limestone reliefs. Thousands of years later, we still have them. So here's the question nobody in power wants you to ask. Where's the Exodus? Where is the record of the plagues? Where is the mention of a Hebrew population that swelled so large it made Pharaoh nervous? Where is the account of an entire labor force walking out in a single night? Egypt documented famines that lasted years. They documented military losses and eventually spun them into propaganda victories. They documented embarrassing defeats at the hands of foreign armies and still found a way to make themselves look heroic. But the Exodus? The 10 plagues that dismantled their entire theological framework one disaster at a time? The night their firstborn died? The day their chariot force drowned in the sea? Nothing. Not a word. And that silence, that very deliberate, very suspicious silence, is exactly what we're going to investigate today. Because when a civilization as thorough as Egypt goes completely quiet about something, that's not an absence of evidence. That's evidence of erasure. That's a government burying a file. And the file they tried to bury? It's sitting right here in the book of Exodus, and it is not what most people think it is.
This was never just a slave story. This was a verdict. And Egypt's blank record is the confession. If you've ever felt like the official version of events left something important out, type "the truth still stands" in the comments. Because what we're about to walk through is the account the most powerful empire in the ancient world could not afford to let survive. Let's go back to the beginning. By the time Exodus opens, the Israelites have been in Egypt for generations, descendants of Joseph, the Hebrew who once saved the country from famine. But the man who knew Joseph was long dead, and the new Pharaoh looked at the population numbers and felt something ancient and political: fear. Exodus 1:9 records him saying it plainly to his officials. "Look, the Israelites have become far too numerous and powerful for us." That's not religious language. That's the language of a government watching a demographic it doesn't control. Exodus 1:7 describes what he was seeing. The Israelites were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. This was not a small displaced minority living quietly in the corner of the delta. This was a demographic event, a population surge so visible, so undeniable, that the most powerful king on earth looked at it and felt threatened. Think about the irony. The empire that would spend centuries trying to erase this story first tried to erase the people in it. So Pharaoh did what empires do. He turned neighbors into labor, forced brick quotas, taskmasters with whips, unbearable working conditions under the Egyptian sun.
The reasoning was cold and simple. Exhaust the people and they don't have the energy to revolt. Wear them down until they can barely breathe, let alone multiply. The plan had a logic to it. The plan also didn't work. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. Exodus 1:12 puts it plainly. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. The empire's solution was fueling the very thing it feared. So Pharaoh escalated. He called in the Hebrew midwives, 2 women named Shiphrah and Puah, and gave them a direct order. When a Hebrew woman gives birth to a boy, kill him on the delivery stool, right there. Make it look like a complication. This was ethnic cleansing, state-sponsored, policy level. Don't let the Sunday school familiarity of this story make you soft-pedal what it actually was: a sitting government systematically targeting a generation. The midwives refused. They lied to Pharaoh's face, told him the Hebrew women gave birth so fast they were already delivered before the midwives could arrive, and the text says God honored them for it. But Pharaoh didn't stop. He brought in the order publicly. Every Hebrew male child born was to be thrown into the Nile.
The very river Egyptians worshipped as the source of all life was now being used as a disposal site for children. Into this world, this exact decree still active, a woman from the tribe of Levi hides her newborn son for 3 months. She can't hide him forever. He's getting louder, he's getting bigger. So she does the only thing she has left. She builds a small waterproof basket, places her son inside it, and sets it in the reeds along the bank of the Nile, the very river Pharaoh commanded these children be thrown into.
She doesn't abandon him, she places him. There is a difference. His sister watches from a distance, and then Pharaoh's daughter comes down to bathe. She finds the basket. She opens it. The baby cries, and she, the daughter of the man who ordered these children killed, has compassion on him. She knows immediately he's a Hebrew child. She takes him anyway. The sister materializes from the reeds and offers to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. Pharaoh's daughter says yes. The woman they bring back, the nurse who gets paid by the palace to raise this boy, is his own mother. The child targeted by Pharaoh's edict ends up in Pharaoh's own household, raised on Egyptian education, fed from the royal table, groomed, trained, and shaped by the very empire he was born to dismantle. Egypt funded its own undoing. His name is Moses, drawn from the water. He grows up Egyptian in every visible way: access to power, education, position, the kind of life most people would never walk away from. But something doesn't sit right with him. One day, as a grown man, he goes out and sees his people, his real people, under the lash. He watches an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. He looks around, nobody watching, and he kills the Egyptian and buries him in the sand. The next day, 2 Hebrews are fighting each other, and Moses tries to intervene, and one of them looks at him and says, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" The secret is out. Pharaoh hears. He moves to have Moses executed. Moses runs. He ends up in Midian, a desert region east of Egypt, sitting by a well with nothing but his life and the sand between his fingers. A priest named Jethro has 7 daughters who come to water their flocks, and local shepherds try to drive them off. Moses defends them. Jethro takes him in. Moses marries one of the daughters. He becomes a shepherd. 40 years pass. That is not a minor detail the story should rush past. 40 years. The man who was raised in a palace spent 4 decades chasing goats through wilderness terrain. No title, no standing, no army, no plan. Just land, silence, and the kind of solitude that either breaks a person or makes them into something they couldn't have become any other way. God doesn't always move when we think he should. Sometimes the instrument he plans to use most is the one he takes the longest to prepare. The wilderness wasn't punishment, it was formation. Moses couldn't walk back into Egypt as a prince of the palace. He had to arrive as something else entirely, and that transformation required time that couldn't be rushed by anyone for any reason. Back in Egypt, the suffering continued without pause. Exodus 2:23 says the Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. And then come 3 verbs that shift the entire trajectory of human history. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God knew, intimately, specifically, what was happening and what it required. Those 3 words aren't the actions of a distant deity catching up on news. They are declarations of covenant commitment. God heard a groan from people who had been waiting 400 years. And before a single plague falls, before a single miracle happens, before any demand is made of any palace, the gears of history begin to move. Not because of Moses, not because of Israel's strength, because of a promise made 400 years before this moment, and a God who keeps his word on a timeline that looks like silence until it suddenly doesn't. Moses is on the far side of the wilderness with his flock when he sees it. A bush that's burning, but not burning up. He turns aside to look, and out of the fire comes a voice that changes everything. It tells him to take off his sandals. The ground is holy. It identifies itself as the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. Moses hides his face because he's afraid to look. And then the voice says, I have seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cry. I know their suffering. I have come down to deliver them. And then the commission. Go. I am sending you to Pharaoh. Bring my people out of Egypt. Moses pushes back immediately. Who am I? What do I tell them your name is? What if they don't believe me? God answers every objection with a name unlike anything Moses had ever encountered in an Egyptian school. I am who I am. Not I was, not I will be. I am. Present. Absolute. Unchanging. He gives Moses signs, a staff that becomes a snake and returns, a hand that goes leprous and heals. Moses tries one more angle. He's not a good speaker, slow of tongue. God says, who made the mouth? Is it not I? Go, and I will be with your mouth. Moses, completely cornered, says simply, please send someone else. That last one frustrates God. But God doesn't disqualify him. He gives him Aaron as a spokesperson. And here's what makes this scene unforgettable when you sit with it. God didn't choose Moses because Moses was impressive. He chose a man who had been nobody for 40 years, who argued 5 separate times, who genuinely believed he was the wrong choice. That's the point.
The liberation of an enslaved nation wasn't going to look like human competence. It was going to look like something else entirely, and that required someone who knew, beyond any doubt, that he wasn't the explanation. Moses goes back to Egypt. He and Aaron walk into Pharaoh's court and deliver the message, let my people go. And Pharaoh's response is almost contemptuous. Exodus 5:2 records him saying, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. He's not scared, he's annoyed. And to make the point, he increases the workload on the Israelites immediately. Same brick quota, no more straw provided, they'll have to find it themselves. It was humiliation dressed as administration. The Israelites turn on Moses. Moses turns back to God. And God says, watch what I'm about to do. What happens next is the investigative heart of this entire story. The plagues don't begin randomly. They begin methodically. Each one is targeted, not at Egypt's geography or economy in a general sense, but at a specific god in the Egyptian pantheon. This was theological warfare, conducted in public, in sequence, over months. Exodus 12:12 says it directly. Against all the gods of Egypt, I will execute judgments. Not incidentally, not as a side effect, intentionally. God was disassembling their entire religious framework, deity by deity, in front of everyone. And Egypt's silence about all of it isn't mysterious once you understand what was actually at stake. First, the Nile turns to blood. Not murky, not dark red, blood. The river the Egyptians worshipped, Hapi, god of the Nile, source of fertility and life, becomes death. Every fish dies, the water stinks, the people cannot drink. Egypt's magicians replicate the sign, but they cannot reverse it. That detail matters more than it seems. They can produce more blood, they cannot produce clean water. There's a difference between mimicking a plague and ending one, and Egypt's most powerful men could only do the first. Frogs come next, millions of them. In the houses, in the beds, in the ovens, in the dough. Hecate, the frog goddess of fertility, was sacred to Egypt, depicted with a frog's head, considered a divine symbol of life and birth. Now she was inescapable in the worst possible way, suffocating every room in the country. Pharaoh begs Moses to remove them. Moses does. They die all at once. And the land, Exodus 8:14 says, reeked. You can almost smell it. Then gnats. The magicians try to replicate this one, and they can't. And for the first time, the men whose entire professional identity was built on matching Moses blow for blow say 4 words to Pharaoh. This is the finger of God. Egypt's own court tapping out at plague 3. But Pharaoh doesn't move. Flies come, and something new happens. The land of Goshen, where Israel lived, is completely untouched. The geographic line is drawn between God's people and the empire holding them. This isn't a coincidence of weather patterns. This is a demonstration that what is happening is chosen, specific, and aimed. Pharaoh bargains. Moses removes the flies. Pharaoh changes his mind the moment the pressure lifts. The sacred livestock die next. Horses, donkeys, camels. The Apis bull was one of the most revered animals in all of Egypt, worshipped as a living incarnation of the god Ptah. Hathor was depicted as a cow.
These weren't just animals, they were deities walking around in animal bodies. Now they were dead in a field. And the Israelite livestock? Untouched. Not one. Boils break out after that. Painful, festering sores on humans and animals alike. The magicians cannot even stand before Moses anymore. They're hiding. Think about what that image says. The men who represented Egypt's entire occult power structure, completely sidelined by Plague 6, still halfway through the sequence. Then hail falls with violence, fire mixed with hail. Exodus 9:24 calls it very heavy hail, such as had never been in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. It flattens crops, it kills people and animals left in the open. And here's where the fractures inside the empire start showing. Some of Pharaoh's own officials who had feared the word of the Lord after the earlier plagues take the warning and shelter their servants and livestock. The ones who ignored it lose everything in the fields. Even inside the palace circle, lines are forming. Pharaoh breaks for a moment. He summons Moses and says, "I have sinned this time. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong." Moses lifts his hands. The hail stops. Pharaoh stiffens again. Locusts come. Not a swarm, an occupation. Every remaining plant, every leaf, every tree, every piece of green that survived the hail, gone. And before this plague even arrives, Pharaoh's own officials go to him and say, Exodus 10:7, "Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined? Even the palace staff is done." Pharaoh bargains again. The locusts come anyway. Then darkness. Ra, the sun god, the supreme deity of the Egyptian pantheon. The source of all light and order in their entire theological system. Pharaoh himself was considered Ra's son on earth. His divine authority derived directly from this god. 3 days of darkness so complete that Exodus 10:21 describes it as darkness that could be felt, not overcast, felt. And light in Goshen. The Israelites have light in their homes, while the empire sits in a darkness you can physically touch. Now, hold both images side by side for a moment, because this is where you have to put yourself in the position of an Egyptian scribe. Your job is to write the official record of this era. What do you put down? How do you document that your supreme deity went silent for 3 days, while the Hebrew God kept the lights on in Goshen? How do you file the administrative report on the day the sacred livestock died while the slaves' animals were untouched? How do you record the moment your own court officials told the king that Egypt was ruined and he kept going? You don't. You bury it. You let that file disappear. And the absence of that file is itself a document. But none of those 9 plagues brought the final release. What comes next is the reason they buried everything so deeply. Pharaoh calls Moses after the darkness and tells him, "Get out of my sight. If you appear before me again, you will die." Moses says, "You're right, I won't come back." One more plague is coming, and before it arrives, God tells the Israelites something. Ask your Egyptian neighbors for silver and gold jewelry, and the Egyptians give it, freely. Exodus 12:36 says the Israelites plundered Egypt, not through violence, but through favor. 400 years of unpaid labor, settling in one night of voluntary gifting. Then midnight comes. In every Egyptian household, from the palace to the dungeon, the firstborn son dies. The firstborn of Pharaoh, the firstborn of the prisoner in the pit, the firstborn of the livestock. Every household in Egypt. But not the houses with blood painted on the doorposts. The Israelites had been instructed, take a lamb, kill it, paint the blood on the sides and top of the door,
Roast a lamb and eat it that night with unleavened bread, with bitter herbs, with sandals on and staff in hand, ready to move. This is the Passover. Hold both images at once, because this is where the cover-up becomes deeply personal. In the palace, Pharaoh, the man considered a living god, Ra's divine son on earth, wakes in the middle of the night to find his firstborn son dead, his heir, his theological continuation. In the Israelite homes across Goshen, former slaves are eating a meal at a table, blood on the door, God passing over them in the dark. The palace in grief, the slaves at a table. One table is losing a god, the other is meeting one. How does Egypt write that down? How does a civilization that built its entire political theology on the divine nature of Pharaoh explain that their god-king's son is dead and the God of the people they enslaved walk through that night untouched? You don't explain it. You erase it. You act like it never happened. Because to record it is to confess that Egypt lost, not to a rival empire, not to a more powerful king, but to a God they had never acknowledged, whose people they had treated as inventory. That's the confession in the silence. Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night. He says, "Get out, take everything, your people, your flocks, your herds, leave, go serve your God as you said, and bless me when you go." Exodus 12:33 says the Egyptians, not just Pharaoh, the whole nation, were urgent with the people to send them out quickly, because they said, "We shall all be dead." The entire country is shaking. 600,000 men. Add women and children and the number climbs well past 1 million. Scholars estimate anywhere from 1 to 3 million total. Add the mixed multitude of non-Israelites who left with them. Add the livestock. An entire nation walks out in one night, the largest organized human movement the ancient world had ever attempted, and the most meticulous record-keeping civilization in human history has no official record of any of it. Not a census note, not an administrative gap, nothing. That's not an oversight. That's a decision made at the highest level. They've been traveling for a few days when Pharaoh's grief turns to economics. Without the labor force, the empire seized up. Building projects stalled, supply chains dead. And Pharaoh, the same man who had watched 10 systematic demolitions of everything Egypt held sacred, who had buried his own son, who had personally released these people in the middle of the night, decides he made a mistake. He mobilizes his chariot force, 600 elite chariots plus every other chariot Egypt had, the full military strength of the ancient world's most powerful army, aimed at people walking with children and livestock. The ego of empire never knows how to let go. The Israelites are camped by the sea when they see the dust cloud approaching, and they panic. These are the same people who watched God turn the Nile to blood, watched frogs fill every room in Egypt, watched the sun disappear for 3 days. These same people now believe they are going to die on a beach. They turn on Moses and say, "Were there no graves in Egypt? Did you bring us out here to die? We told you to leave us alone." That's not ingratitude as much as it's fear talking, the raw animal fear of being trapped with water in front of you and the most powerful army on earth behind you. We do this. We forget fast when the next impossible thing arrives. The miracle that saved us last season stops feeling real when the new danger is visible and close. Moses tells them, "Stand firm, see the salvation of the Lord. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be still." Then God tells Moses to lift his staff over the sea. The sea parts, a wall of water on the left, a wall of water on the right, dry ground in the middle, and Israel walks through, all night long. The Egyptian army follows. Of course they do. That is exactly who they are. That is the logic of empire that has never been stopped by anything before. They drive into the path Israel just walked, and God looks down from the pillar of fire and cloud and throws the Egyptian forces into confusion. The chariot wheels jam. The soldiers start to turn back. Too late. Moses stretches his hand out again. The waters return. The entire chariot force, the commanders, the horses, the soldiers, disappears beneath the sea. Exodus 14:28 says not one of them remained. That army appears nowhere in Egyptian records. Not as a battle, not as a naval disaster, not as a tragic loss, nothing. You do not chisel into stone the day your entire military force drowned chasing a group of former slaves. You don't commission a wall relief of the moment your chariot wheels sank into seabed. You seal that file. You grind the stone flat, you built something else over it and call it different. And they nearly got away with it, except the people who walked through the water remembered, and they wrote it down, and they told their children, and their children told theirs. Israel reaches the far shore, and Moses and his sister Miriam lead them in a song. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. It is the oldest recorded song of worship in human history. A nation that was enslaved the week before, singing on the far bank of a sea that just swallowed the army that held their chains. But liberation is not the same thing as transformation. The wilderness makes that brutally clear. Within 3 days of the greatest miracle they've ever witnessed, the water they find is bitter, undrinkable. The people complain. God shows Moses a piece of wood to throw in, and it becomes sweet. A few weeks in, they're hungry. God rains down manna, bread from the sky, appearing every morning with the dew, tasting like honey, exactly enough for each day. Quail come in the evenings. Water flows from a rock when Moses strikes it at God's command. Every physical need is met, supernaturally, consistently, daily. And still, every few days, they complain again. Exodus 16 is almost uncomfortable to read. The people are already longing for Egypt. At least in Egypt we sat by pots of meat, they say, having apparently forgotten the forced labor, the infanticide order, and the army they watched drown 6 weeks earlier. Don't rush to condemn them for it. Use it instead to understand something true about all of us. Freedom is an event. Transformation is a process. The Israelites had spent generations under a system that told them what to do, when to do it, and punished deviation. You don't undo 400 years of that in a month of wilderness. The complaining isn't simply ingratitude. It's the reflex of people who haven't yet learned who they are without the empire telling them. There is a gap between being freed from something and being truly free from it. The wilderness is where that gap gets closed. Slowly, painfully, honestly. 3 months after leaving Egypt, Israel camps at the base of a mountain called Sinai. God tells Moses, I'm coming down. Consecrate the people. Set boundaries around the mountain. Don't let anyone touch it. On the 3rd morning, thunder, lightning, thick cloud, fire, a trumpet sound growing louder and louder until the whole camp trembles. Exodus 19:18 says, Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The mountain shook. The people begged Moses, you speak to us. Don't let God speak to us directly or we will die. Moses goes up. God speaks the 10 Commandments into the smoke. Get the Sunday school framing out of your head. This is not a morality checklist for individuals. This is the founding document of a covenant nation, a people who had no national identity for 400 years, who had been defined entirely by what they produced for someone else, are now being given identity, purpose, law, and relationship. No other gods, no idols. Honor the Sabbath. Honor your parents. Don't murder, steal, commit adultery, bear false witness, or covet. These are the load-bearing walls of a civilization being built from scratch in the desert by people who have known nothing but servitude. You cannot build a society without defining what it values. This is constitutional law being handed down on a mountain to a people who have no country yet. Moses goes up to receive the fuller law, and Israel doesn't wait long. 40 days was too much. They went to Aaron, who should have known better, who had stood before Pharaoh, who had watched every plague unfold, who had crossed the sea on dry ground, and demanded a God they could see. Aaron collected the gold earrings from the people, the very gold they carried out of Egypt. He melted it down and made a calf. And the people looked at this thing they made on a Tuesday afternoon and said, These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.
The thunder on the mountain hadn't even finished. Moses was still holding the tablets, and below, in real time, the covenant was being broken before it was fully delivered. This reads like madness, but it isn't madness. It's something more troubling. It's the comfort of what's familiar. Egypt had animal gods. Egypt had visible, tangible, stationary deities you could point to and say, "There is my God." The God of Sinai is invisible, mobile, sovereign, and terrifying in his presence. The golden calf offered certainty. You could manage a calf. The calf wouldn't shake the mountain. God tells Moses what's happening below and says his anger burns, and then says something stunning. Your people, whom you brought out of Egypt.
Not my people right now. Not in this moment. Moses intercedes. He stands between God and the entire nation and argues. He says, "Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember your name in the ears of Egypt. Remember the promise." And Exodus 32:14 says, "The Lord relented." Moses descends. He sees the celebration, sees the golden animal, and breaks the stone tablets at the base of the mountain, a visible act of covenant rupture. He grinds the calf to powder, puts it in water, and makes the people drink it. And then Moses does something that should stop you cold. He goes back up the mountain, and he says to God, "If you will, forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of your book that you have written." He's offering his own name, his own record, his own existence in exchange for the people who just humiliated him. The man who argued 5 times at a burning bush, the man who didn't want the job. That same man is now offering to be erased in the place of a people who built an idol while he was doing them a favor. That shape, a leader willing to be blotted out for the people he serves, is not accidental. It echoes something further down the line. But we're not there yet. God forgives Israel, and Moses asks for something no one has asked before. He says, "Show me your glory." After all of it, the plagues, the crossing, the broken tablets, the intercession, show me who you actually are. God says, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you. I will proclaim my name, but my face, you cannot see my face and live." So God hides Moses in the cleft of a rock, covers him with his hand, and passes by, letting Moses see only the aftermath. The back of the divine presence moving through. And what God speaks in that moment, passing that cleft, is not his power or his judgment. It's his character. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Not power first, character first. Moses descends. His face is shining, so much so that the people are afraid to come near him, and he has to veil himself when speaking to them. Then the tabernacle gets built. Exodus spends 6 full chapters on the construction: the curtains, the boards, the lampstand, the ark, the coverings, the dimensions of every corner. Some readers skip this section. You shouldn't, because what God is doing here is telling you something about who he is. This is the God who just watched his people build an idol while his law was still being written, and his response is not to stay distant. His response is to design a dwelling place in the middle of their camp, not above, not behind, not at a safe distance up a mountain, in the middle. Craftsmen filled with the Spirit of God built it exactly as instructed, and when Moses finishes erecting the tabernacle, every piece in place, every instruction followed. Exodus 40 verse 34 says, "The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." The presence of God descends so completely that Moses himself cannot enter. The cloud moves when they travel, it stays when they camp. From that day forward, the pillar of cloud leads them by day, and the pillar of fire by night. Now go back to where we started. The empire that tried to bury this story is gone. Its gods are in museums, its temples are ruins that tourists photograph. The gods they worshipped, Hapi, Heket, Ra, Apis, Hathor, names in textbooks now, not names spoken in prayer. The records Egypt kept so obsessively are still being excavated, studied, debated by archaeologists in every decade.
And still, no Exodus, still no plagues, still no record of a vanished labor force, a devastated economy, a drowned army. The silence is permanent now. They buried it too well. But here's the thing about burying something God did. It doesn't stay buried. It never does. It gets carried instead, in the memory of a people, in the pages of a book, in the meal eaten every year at Passover tables around the world for 3,000 years, in the question asked by every generation of Jewish children, why is this night different from all other nights? In the song Miriam sang on the far shore, in the name whispered in the cleft of a rock, in this conversation, right now, happening thousands of years after the last Egyptian scribe filed the last incomplete record and thought the story was finally contained. History is not written by whoever holds the pen the longest. The most powerful force in the ancient world went silent about the event that broke them, because you cannot edit your way around the God.
The most world-shattering things that have ever happened are almost always found in the records no one wanted to keep, in the gaps where the empire thought no one was watching, in the groans that traveled upward from generations of people who had no reason to believe anyone heard. 3 quiet verbs: heard, remembered, knew. Before a single miracle, before the sea parted or the sky rained bread, God responded to a groan, not to a strategy, not to an army, to a groan, and the gears of history began to move. The empire that tried to erase the story is dust. The people they tried to erase are still here. The God who moved through Egypt in 10 judgments, who opened the sea, who descended on a mountain in fire, who lived in a tent in the middle of a desert camp full of people who had just built a golden calf, still moving. What does it do to you, honestly, to realize that the same God who heard a groan from an enslaved nation and moved the machinery of history in response, and still found a way to move in among them after everything they did, still hears? And what might that say about the stories in your own life that feel like they've been buried, silenced, or written out of the official record?